Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host Thomas Sheridan. I'm not sure the date, but it's the third Wednesday in August. I'm recording this show in advance, sitting in the car here at Strandhill Airport in Sligo, and it's Sunday morning here. I'm a bit hungover. I was on the lash last night with my mates. Had a great time, but I'm not wrecked, but I'm a little bit hungover. And today's show, as I said, is being recorded in advance. My website is thomassheridanarts.com. My YouTube channel, where this will be directly uploaded following the broadcast on realitybitesradio.com, is Thomas Sheridan Arts. Now, tonight's show, it's a bit weird saying tonight's show because it's like the morning here. Tonight's show, I want to cover a few different topics, but in particular I want to talk about the restrictions that people put upon their own cognition and mind in order to fit with dogma or with trends and so on like that. And this show could easily be called the Feckin' Egypt's Guide to the Universe, as much as the Enclosure Acts, or Acts of Enclosure, I think I'll call this show, Acts of Enclosure. Now, before I get to that, the reason why the show is being recorded in advance is because as you're listening to this, I'll probably have just come down from a mountain in the wilds of Ulster, as I'm in the process of being one of the a co-host on a documentary series about megaliths, which will be coming out next year. The big project. It's going to have aerial footage of megaliths all over the world, and I've basically been brought in to do the Sligo and Irish parts, and also might be going to other places too, like the Isle of Man and maybe even Malta. But for now, I'll be as you're listening to this, I'll have come down from a mountain and probably chilling out after being clinging to a rock somewhere. And that's what I love. I've been brought in because I know a fair bit. Actually, I know a lot about Irish mythology and how it relates to the landscape. I did a talk at an event yesterday for a friend who was opening a cultural centre, and before me was an archaeologist, and the archaeologist was an interesting guy. He was talking about the etymology of the name of the areas around where the place was in Sligo was taking place, and it tied in perfectly because I didn't know this, but the area was called, basically translated from Irish to the plain of the Fomorians, and the Fomorians were a so-called, should we say, mythic race that apparently came to Ireland from Scandinavia, and he gave us a very good insight, but also he put some mythology stuff in, and it was kind of important that I followed afterwards, because he said, just like in every other mythology, like you have in the Vedic mythology and you have in the Mayan mythology, you have this idea of a force of darkness and a force of light, and they're in battle and conflict. And it turned out that the west coast of Ireland is generally, the tribes there were generally considered the bad guys, where I live, and on the east coast they were considered the forces of good, where I grew up. And I thought that was kind of an interesting metaphor for my life, because when I moved down here I started writing and talking about what they call the bad guys, the shadow side. And when I got up for my talk, the same people were still there because I was right after it, and I said, I just want to reiterate the fact that when our pre-Christian ancestors spoke about the good side and the bad side, it's very easy for us to put a Christian overlay on that, to assume that the good guys were all wonderful and the forces of light, like the forces of light were all wonderful and the forces of darkness were all bad. It's very easy to assume that based on the idea that monotheism of a god and a devil, a heaven and a hell, that comes directly, when you look at the history, out of Zoroastrianism 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And so people were amazed by that, because a few of them came up in the end and I said, and they never thought about that. And I said, the idea of the shadow, that we have we have a shadow inside us, unless you're a new age nutcase, and then you have only the shadow inside you, and you're pretending to be all sweetness and light on the surface. And we have a light side in front on us, and it's this. I wouldn't say battle. It's more like an interactive dance between light and shadow, the opposing forces inside us, and inside nature, inside society, and inside culture, that generates evolution. And so for every person that likes my books, I might have a critic. I don't have a problem with it once their criticism is based on they've actually read the book or something like that, they've listened to it, and I've no problem with that at all. And because that's a good thing, because that reaction to light and shadow, criticism and product and creative, is very important, because basically what we're doing, this story of humanity, is we're fine-tuning ourselves. Hopefully we'll never fine-tune ourselves, because then we'd be screwed. But we'd end up like all Stepford Wives or something. But the idea is a constant retuning. And something comes along and it's accepted as fact, then a new generation or a new paradigm jumps on the scene and it tears it apart. Now, very rarely does the old paradigm completely vanish. It either modified itself for the new reality, or aspects of it are carried along. So for instance, like communism was a complete failure. However, aspects of communism have carried on. Corporations have found the idea of communism, of corporatism, and the idea of that the purpose of the corporation, just like in the times of National Socialism, is to be a sole contractor for the state. So basically the corporation produces the marketable product, the state becomes the procurer on behalf of the citizenry. Most obvious today, and most tragically, you see that with big pharma. It's basically, you have, say, in England, you have a situation like you have the National Health Service. National Health Service buys all these psychiatric drugs, SSRIs, and hands them out willy-nilly, no matter what anyone says. I know they do, and it happens in Ireland too and everywhere else. And this is when people talk about, when people were talking about Obamacare, America's such a feckin' mental hospital that no one ever talks about the real issues. They all talk about nonsense. So when the Obamacare thing was coming in, you had all the right wingers all saying crap like, "Oh, there'll be mandatory abortions. Our taxes will be used to pay for sex changes and boob jobs, and it'll be like a communist country. They'll have socialized medicine and all this crap." On the left-hand side, it was all this thing like, we should have free healthcare. Well, we're entitled to healthcare. We didn't have this, that, and the other. We deserve a European-type system. Now, the European-type system, which I've lived under most of my life, is all very good and well. But I can tell you for a fact, like here in Ireland, we have you have a choice of both. You can either go with what we call the medical card system, which is like it's almost like a social security card for people who can't afford healthcare. I have to say, I've done that, and you can also pay for your care, and I've done that as well. I had an operation here about 10 years ago, and I just paid cash. And it was very good value, I have to say. It was not, it was not a rip-off or not like that, because it was in a state hospital, and I got very good treatment, and the bill was surprisingly small, and they allowed me to pay it off in installments. I don't have any problem with paying for healthcare, and also I've had private insurance as well. So when sickness comes along, I'll make the choice. God forbid nothing terrible happens, but in the meantime, I'll just either get insurance or I'll pay for the operation. And God forbid if something really bad happened, like I had a very serious illness, I know the state will the medical card system, I have no problem with using that either. So I think that's a healthier way to do it, rather than being dependent on one or the other. But the real issue in America that was not addressed by the Obamacare debate, even the name Obamacare is stupid, was is this just an opportunity for the drug companies to foist drugs upon us? as a state contractor. So that'd be the bad thing that came out of communism. The good thing would be, well, state healthcare and things like that. So it came out of Marxism. So, but even though communism as it stands was a terrible system, just like National Socialism, just like corporatism, they don't work. They're not self-sustaining. Governments are useless at creating dynamic forces in culture. Only people and individuals can do that. And so, when a paradigm, I know I'm rambling here, but when one paradigm collapses, and a new paradigm comes along, it's rare that the old paradigm is wiped out. Things are taken along with it. But generally, in a kind of an autocratic world, they're not the stuff. It's not the stuff that's good for people that's taken along. It's the stuff that's good for governments and for corporations. Now, this long tangent brings us into something else. Human beings, we live in our little. We're just like farm animals. Anyone who says we don't live like farm animals is a moron. Is a moron. They're an absolute moron, right? Because we do. That's what your little mortgage. When you buy a little mortgage and your little house in the suburbs with your 3 bedrooms and your garage and your fence, that you bought yourself a little farm on behalf of the state. You're just a little tax animal. You're a little tax. You see, we've got an even worse deal than farm animals, because not only are we farmed by the state for our revenue, for revenue collection, but we also build our own pens and corrals, and we call them the suburban dream and whatever. And banks we actually take money out from banks to pay to be penned in, and so we can pay taxes to the state. And that's what we are. We're farm animals. Now, that's not like employment. And when I say employment is different than productivity or creativity or work or labor. Well, not labor, but work. Employment is not natural for human beings. It's not. Work is natural for human beings. You get out there and you work. You need to do things. You need to create things. But employment is different than work. And when they say on the news, like, we have so many people unemployed, they don't say so many people not working, because many of those unemployed people will be working. They'll be doing things. They'll be creating, they'll be building, they'll be making things, but they're not employed. And that's the problem. Governments are worried about you not being employed, not because they care about you, because when you're employed, what that basically means is you're a high productive tax animal, and they want you to be a high productive tax animal by paying as much revenue as possible. And people who are on the dole or live in council houses, what they're like is, they're not producing revenue for the state as tax animals, but they're considered dangerous, because they would be the ones who would they would be the ones who would actually revolt against the system and have revolutions. So what they've done to them is, the middle class in suburbia and above all have their suburban dreams and their little tax animal corral or enclosure, while the working classes, unemployed people, them ones, they're like, the way I don't know if you know this, but here there's 2 types of one of the reasons I don't feel bad about eating bacon in Ireland is because of our climate, a lot of farmers turn pigs wild. They go wild. They don't go wild, but the farmer will have, say, 30, 40 acres of woodland, and he'll let the pigs go wild in it. Or he has a lake on his property and there's an island. The pigs will live on the island, and they're wild. But they're no trouble, because that's why pigs are banned by certain religions like Islam and Judaism, because they can't be herded like goats and sheep and cattle, and that's why they're considered unclean. That's where that all comes from. But pigs are left go wild, and they run around, and they grow to enormous sizes, and the bacon they produce tastes the best of all. There's some bacon and black pudding I buy from wild organic pigs that live on an island in Lough Erne, and it's the best bacon and black pudding you could get anywhere. And I don't feel bad about it, because those pigs had a good life. They were wild on the island, and they, with their friends, having a great time, and they lived long lives. And so That's what the unemployed are. The unemployed are like those pigs that the farmer sets wild, or they're like deer that some farmers will have venison that runs wild on the land, and they don't live in enclosures. And so the idea of them keeping them giving them a council house and giving them the dole and that kind of thing is so they can stock up on cheap beer, cigarettes. Now, I'm not putting down. I come from that background. I'm not saying this is how all these people are, but generally, you do. That's the idea. That's what the governments want. And playing Xbox all day, and watching TV and movies and that kind of thing, and they're happy, and it keeps them happy, and it keeps them from a revolution. And this idea of humans as livestock is relatively new. It's relatively new. It really began in Babylon. There's not a lot of evidence that humans lived in boxes. See, the box, the square, that's what we're getting to on the show here, the idea of a square deal, that these are from a Freemasonic, a real square guy, or 3 square males, and I don't know if that one is true. Well, actually, I think that is true, because I was reading something about I think it was Bernard Cornwell's, one of the Sharp novels years ago. I really got into the Sharp novels. Remember the TV show with Sean Bean, all the women went mad for him? Well, the books are really good, and I wrote to Bernard Cornwell, and he was a really nice guy, and he was planning, I don't know if it ever happened, but he was planning to do some stuff where Sharp comes to Ireland to fight in the 1798 revolution, or something like that. I don't know if it ever came. But anyway, I'm pretty sure that in one of his books, I think it was about one of the ones about the Peninsula Wars in Portugal or Spain, where where Sharp makes a comment, and he says something like, "Oh, bloody Masons with their 3 square meals a day." So that may be true. I used to think that was. I first heard that in that context from, what was his name, Jordan Maxwell, and I thought that was bullshit. But that might be true. That could be true. That 3 square meals thing. So the idea of the square, like the black and white squares on the floor, I don't find Freemasons I've been studying the Freemasons a lot around here. There was quite a few lodges around here. A lot of them are connected to British military, and also things like British Legion. When Ireland, when this part of the country was still under British rule, and so a lot of them that dissolved, and then the Irish lodges that came after them, they're really just social clubs and that kind of thing. And they're kind of geeky. They don't have great secrets in these ones. I think after World War One, the Freemasonic lodges lost. I know I'm rambling, but you'd have to bear with me. The Freemasonic lodges, from what I can tell, lost a lot of their power, and in Ireland they were badly damaged by partition when the south of Ireland broke away from the United Kingdom, and so they didn't want to be seen as being kind of part of the British establishment. So a lot of the Irish lodges reorganised themselves as just sort of like Presbyterian men's clubs, and tried to get a better image for themselves, because as not being just military guys, but British military guys, but like doing charity and stuff. And that's probably what they do today. But prior to that, there were some very interesting lodges I've discovered, and I used to think that the whole thing of the Freemasons having secrets and all this kind of thing, and the Freemasons. This is funny. There's a road race going on. I know this is what makes this show special, folks. I'm sitting in the car here, and there's a road race going on that's starting at the airport car park, and there's all young guys and girls, and they're going to race around the mountain. Road racing, running and jogging races, walking races are very popular in this part of Ireland. And there's a guy just gone right in front of me into the woods, and he's taking his shit. He came out, he waved to me. And that's what I love about Ireland. He hit his shit before the race started in the woods. But that's what I love about this country. It's like things like that happen and no one really cares. That's why the Irish people will never be fully farmed, ever. We'll tolerate so much, but we'll always be like what that guy just did. But we don't give a shit, and he did, but he metaphorically he didn't give a shit. But Where was I? Yeah, so I thought a lot of Freemasonic stuff was nonsense about them having special occult secrets. It is nowadays, but as I've been looking into the dissolved lodges around here, because you can get the books from the county library, which is great, and the county archives, because a lot of their files and books were turned over to the libraries, and yeah, they were much more, shall we say, esoterically and occult minded, and they've got very different. When I look at Freemasonic lodges, you see the artwork and the symbolism has changed since Victorian times. Yet they all have the all-seeing eye, and a lot of them have the fasciae, and there's the two columns. But other ones have symbols in there that I'm trying to figure out. Now I have a friend. I know I have some weird friend. I have this is like, this is why you should live your life to the full and not, limit yourselves by not making friends with someone who has a different opinion of yours. I have a friend whose boyfriend is in the Orange Order not in Sligo, in the next county, Donegal, and I'm going to try and get some information off them, because their banners, and I mean it's the real Orange Order, sashes and bowler hats, the whole work, the glorious 12th and all that, and they're mostly harmless in the south of Ireland too, but there's a lot of interesting symbols on their banners, and he's like a grand master or something like that. So I'm going to try and get some info off him. But they keep telling you, oh, you have to be initiated. And I got talking to one guy in the Orange Order recently, and he was amazed at, I was on Facebook, and it was during the 12th of July ceremonies, and he posted a photograph of his dad's the dad's lodge banner, and a very beautiful artwork, I have to say, embroidery on it, and of course there was an image, a big picture in the middle of Protestants being ethnically cleansed by Catholics. But anyway, apart from that, there was all interesting symbols all around the outside, and I had something like, Irish Protestants, forever in the service of the King, or some shit like that. But all around was all the Freemasonic symbols, and there was lots of ones I've never seen before. So, and I asked him, and he said, I don't know what's... And he was actually very open, but he says, he didn't tell me what they meant, but I said, that's what this means, you're right. That's what that, Jacob and Boaz, yeah, you're right about that, you're right about that, you're right about that. And there was interesting ones, and other little strange symbols like I've never seen, like fruits and apples and all that, and then he said, I don't know what they mean. So there was different symbols on the Freemasonic stuff years ago than there is now. When after World War One, a lot of Freemasons died in the First World War. A lot of the working class Freemasons, especially in the north of England, died, and a lot of lodges they either closed up or reorganised themselves, or they being a Freemason fell out of fashion in the military, because prior to that, and this is fact, if you were a Freemason in the military and the battle was over, your chances of not being murdered or being executed or you get better treatment if your fellow lodge brother arrested you. This heard this a lot in the Civil War in America, but also in Napoleonic times. French Freemasons in 1798 here in Ireland, during the United Irishmen uprising, the French army invaded to help the Irish fight the British, and when the war was over, all the French Freemasons were all basically went to dinner with their English enemies, while the Irish were being hanged off trees and being tortured and executed and thrown down wells and everything, awful things, but castrated. But so when World War One came along, there was so much slaughter. There was no point in being a Freemason in the military, because bullets don't care if you're in a lodge or not. But they did have secrets, and a lot of those secrets revolved around how not to be a farm animal, being a tax animal or a farm animal or the property of the crown, to the same extent as the rest of society. And the occult aspects allowed people to escape that. And this is what, when you think about the people who've properly woken up, not the feckers who fucking shagging all day, looking all day long, looking at pedo stuff and going, I don't pedophiles, they're fucking, yeah, no, we have to read about the pedophiles. And those fellas. I'm talking about the ones who've explored esoteric arts, spirituality, and all that kind of thing, as well as seeing how it operates at the higher level, and learning how to distinguish the nonsense between an idiot like Jay-Z making a triangle, which is bullshit. He's just, or Madonna doing that send-up song about the Illuminati, and distinguishing that from the real stuff that you see in like tombstones and on real kind of government buildings. And we kind of learned that there's another way to live, indirectly, and that's what the lodges and the old Masons were about. That's what they learned, the occult things. That was all about that. And that's why then Freemasonry became incredibly sinister after World War One. And I believe things like that ridiculous free men movement, I think that was... If you read free men kind of language and stuff, it's pure Masonic. The whole way of addressing people is very similar to how they address each other in the lodges. So that I absolutely believe that the Freeman movement was probably an MI5, something like that, a way of getting people who are waking up, instead of having them chasing. They know that a certain bunch won't be chasing space aliens, so they've got to give them those idiots something. So they give them the Freeman of the land stuff, and they're off in fantasy land chasing that, instead of actually waking up. They're learning about common law and praising the Magna Carta. Now here we're going to get really interesting. Now, prior to Babylon, people did not live in squares. They lived in circles. They lived in circles. They had round houses predominantly, or oval-shaped houses. But there was even the houses that are supposed to be squared were not. They were oval on both ends, and they didn't have the same level of corralling and fencing in, and as the Rush song goes, subdivisions between the different properties. Now, when the Vikings came to Dublin and the Wood Quay was dug up, the properties were very subdivided, but Ireland had been Christianized, and that was where that came from. And they'd moved around from the round houses until the Christian system, the Middle Eastern system, the Babylonian system of having you in a box in a square next to you, the farm animals on either side of you. This is why these fools who have a big problem with these immigrants coming to England through the Channel Tunnel need to get their shit together, because those people are not coming to England to be freed. They're coming to England to be slaved. And instead of seeing them as enemies, you should see them as allies in your struggle against the forces, the squared forces. But when the idea of the square is an accounting unit. So a good example of that would be King John and the enclosure in the 12th century. King John in England and the enclosure thing, where the Enclosure Acts, which have been constantly ratified and amended ever since. Essentially, the idea you have the farmland for the commoners, which is not you and me, it's the wealthy landlords. That's why another thing why freemen are up their own asses. And the demarcation, their taxation units, your dream property in the suburbs. All you have is an accounting unit. That's all. That's all your property, and your site, and your land, and your apartment. That's all it is. It's an accounting unit. And that King John started that following the Doomsday Book, of classifying the land and breaking it up into fields. And that's why Ireland has that patchwork quilt. Like people say, oh, Ireland is so pretty, all those little fields with the hedgerows, and they do look pretty because the country is pretty and it's green. But those hedgerows were demarcations of accounting units for the farm animals. And the farmhouse with its little fence around it and its farm outbuildings, that was an accounting unit for the human animals, for the state, when the taxation came along. And that was a way of monitoring and knowing people's names, and censuses grew out of that. Like in 1890, Russia performed an astounding census, that there was something like a couple of 100 million people in an enormous amount of volumes were classified and in a vast nation of Russia, and it was even bigger back then. And every single person in Russia, serf or noble, was counted, and due to that, the Russian economy raced ahead, because they were able to account for more. People could not hide their taxes. They could not hide their money as easy, and everyone started paying taxes. It all begins with kings. It all begins with the Prussian kings, by the way, at this level. Now, so what the purpose of the groups like the Freemasons was to live within that system but find a way around it. And the idea was, if you were smart enough, clever enough, if you knew your nods and winks, and you were a square guy, a real square guy, as they said in America, you see, the Freemasons this is the way we should have woken up. You had crisis actors like Charlie Veitch and Alex Jones having you all running down the streets with megaphones going, "Not known, it's that damn," and all this kind of thing, and people making fools of themselves, going like, "No," and all this kind of thing down the street. "Wake up, sheeple," and all this stuff. Well, you didn't wake up if you announced yourself like that. If you had the megaphone in your hand in the street, if you woke up if you woke up and nobody knew. You know what I'm saying? Nobody knew. And you keep it quiet inside. That's why I can tell just by the numbers of people that, my Google Plus page is not that old, like 2 years, and it has already something like 3 million views of the articles on it. And that's the real measure of the numbers on the internet. And that's how many people are reading my stuff. And there ain't that many alternative people out there. These are mainstream people who are reading it, and they're going. And like yesterday when I did that talk, that was a completely mainstream audience. But I know, because if there's one thing that the universe has gifted me with, I am a good communicator, and I do know how to entertain. I tell jokes and stuff like that as well, but I also deliver information. And I had that audience in the palm of my hand. And they came up afterwards and says, "You have completely changed my whole view of the world. It's like something I've never heard before." And that makes me feel good, because that person will then go off and explore. And I don't even give them information about my stuff or me or anything like that. I just say to them, "No, go out there and look into this, look into that." And that's how you do it. And so the Freemasons were like that. They were awake esoterically and politically and every other way, but they pretended they weren't. They pretended they were part of the system. So instead of slaughtering each other in wars, when the battle was over, they looked after each other, even if they're on opposing sides. And the alternative movement has never learned this. All it does is fight among itself. And I have nothing wrong with criticism. There's nothing wrong with people in criticizing another person's work. That's okay. But there's so many nasty wee shits out there that call themselves truthers, and they bring in people's personal lives and private lives and all this kind of crap. And it's all like some fucking Nigel in some shithole town in the north of England going, "I'm gonna expose him." Or, no, sorry, not it's fucking in the south of England. Some fucking dump, like Basildon or some crap place like that. "I'll fucking expose him." Never left that place, or some shithead in Ireland never left a dump like Mullingar. Has no life experience, and he's like going, I'm going to get him. Oh yeah, and a lot of that kind of crap. And that's what that's more annoying than anything else. No maturity, and if push came to shove, and there really was a police state that took over, they would be the first ones shitting in their trousers, screaming for their mammies, and tell me what I have to do for the government, and I'll do it. Just don't arrest me. That's what they'd all be. They'd be the first ones, like the hard fuckers who go to war. Like any professional soldier will tell you that mercenaries often bottle it. They're big hard men, unless they're ex-military men. These mercenaries go out to fight in wars, and as soon as the battle starts, they're screaming for their mammies because they haven't been properly trained. Because it's real. It's no longer a game. It's real. And that's what that's a so there's, but yes, there are people that I've met who are woke up and they're like the old Masons or the old Gnostics, or the real Illuminati, the one prior to Adam Weishaupt, and they keep it real down low key. And a lot of them, I think, are druids, and I think the druids did survive, and maybe even the lodges. A lot of them are full of druids, and I think there's a good evidence to kind of show that. They do have secrets about the world, and they do. It's almost like they're blackmailing the establishment. So, you know, a truther is such a stupid person that they're the last person in the world you should ever go to for any advice or information. But the second most stupid person in the world is the person who thinks they're a skeptic or a debunker, and they are policing any kind of alternative opinion. Why they're so stupid is because they don't have it in their head that 90% of the stuff that they're attacking people is not proven. It's just consensus. It's society. It's what we all must believe the same thing. It's a corralling and an enclosure of the consciousness. So, like, okay, I give David Icke a hard thing over the reptilian stuff. I do. I'm always, I give him a hard time over that. Guess what? That could be true. However, the problem is that after 20 odd years, he's provided zero proof, and that's where the issue is. But if he provided real proof tomorrow, I'd say fair play to you. You're bang on about that. I was wrong. You can't. So if you're going to be pushing an idea that long, you have to have proof. You just have to. You can't just throw speculation out there. You have to have proof, and that's the issue there. And that's it. Like, other people have other things that I don't agree with, but it's because they're not providing proof. You have to provide proof. Now, somebody this week, I saw someone going after chemtrail people this week. Now, my feelings about chemtrails are, I don't know anything about them and I haven't got a clue what's going on. But I do know there's an awful lot more flights these days than there used to be. And I can tell you what I know is bullshit. This idea that they're filling chemicals in planes and gassing us, that's bullshit. That's all bullshit. There's no proof of that. Zero. But there is proof that the climate is being altered by these planes. I've no doubt about that. This summer has been awful in Ireland. And I look up and all I see are, and the more bad the weather has gotten in these islands, the more people have flown to Spain, Portugal, Greece, Italy, and the Bahamas and sunny climes in order to get away from the poor weather. And that has meant more flights in the sky. And I have no doubt at all that even if those trails, which they probably are caused by more powerful jet engines today than we used to have, or something like that they used to have in the past, it's still affecting the climate. It's still an issue. And I told you, I think I told you the story a few weeks back. An old Irish, if you want to know anything about the weather, number one expert, an old Irish farmer, indisputable. They have a knowledge of the climate that no meteorologist would ever have, ever. In the same way they understand animals better than any biologist would ever do. And you ask them, you want to know about the weather, ask them. And this older guy, he must be nearly 90 now, and he still works every day on the farm. You see, he works, he's not employed, he works as a farmer. And I was talking to him, and he says to me that the weather has definitely gotten unstable. But he said it's also lost its extremities. He says years ago, and this was his own words, before we had so many planes in the sky, the winters were definitely colder. There was a more deep frost, and the summers were definitely hotter. So the weather in Ireland, in this part of Ireland, was more extreme in its fluctuations. Summer was summer and winter is winter. And I said, hold on a second, you said before all the planes were in the sky. What do you mean by that? And he goes, no, he says, as airline travel became more popular, he says the weather is more unstable now. And he says to me, and the proof of that was during World War II. He says, prior to World War II, he said if you saw a plane over Ireland, you know, you'd stop at what you were doing to look at it. It was like that. It was that rare. And during World War II, the skies were full with American bombers that were going over to bomb Germany, and also British bombers that were flying through the corridor here. There was a special flight corridor that the Irish government granted to the Americans, and still exists to this day, and the British, to get to the Atlantic. And so they'd be going into bomb shipping, and he said that the worst winters of all happened all over Europe right after World War II, and he said it was because of all the bombers. It changed the climate, and then it stabilized again, and then he said when cheap flights really took off in the 1980s, it started getting unstable again. So when people say to me, it's chemtrails is all bullshit, well, maybe the aspect that they're gassing us is, but the folks who bring up this idea that it's actually a geoengineering, either by deliberate or by default, I can't argue with them at all. And that's the difference between enclosure thinking and an active enclosure and wisdom. A wise person doesn't take a dogmatic position and then defend it. A wise person considers it. Now, like for instance, someone could come up to me and they say to me, I'm Jesus Christ, I'm the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. I would never laugh in his face. I might do it online or something like that, but I wouldn't do it to his face. At the same time, I would think to myself okay, he's obviously, the man is delusional. He's not Jesus. But what has made him think that? And that's wisdom. What has brought him to this point? Is he unwell? Has he gone through a difficult experience in his life that maybe had a nervous breakdown and it led him to this point? But that's wisdom. It's not like you're a fucking Egypt and you just walk away. That to me is not how an initiate or was. Like if these druids and if these real sort of like, and I do believe. It's not that I want to believe. I mean, I do want to believe, but I genuinely, sincerely do believe that we have friends out there that are aware of the psychopathic control grid. And maybe they're the ones who feed stuff out about corrupt politicians and all this kind of corrupt business people and all this nonsense. Maybe they're the ones who feed this stuff out, because no truther does, because the truthers are thick fucks. They just wait for some Christian group in America to like announce something and then they just repeat it ad hoc. That's all. That's where 90% of all the truthers get their information, is American Bible bent Christian nuts. That's where they get it from. And the rest of them are too lazy to do any research. To them, research is watching a YouTube video with music going dud, 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 dud. But the old-fashioned conspiracy theorists like me are different, because we start with a blank sheet of paper and say a biplane just flew over. I'd love one of them. Why the biplane ever went out of fashion is beyond me. The things are incredibly maneuverable. And they're probably not. They don't have probably not the speed of a monoplane, but they can land on a really short runway and take off from a really short runway, and they're just so acrobatic and maneuverable. I'm surprised they've never came back as some kind of military aircraft or something like that, because this one flying around here is doing amazing things. It was so maneuverable. I thought it was a model when I first saw it at a distance. But anyway, I digress. See, that's how you should be. I mean. That's how I am in my life. I was sitting here, I'm just chatting away for you guys, and the glory and the beauty of life reveals itself. I saw the guy taking a shit in the woods in front of me, and he saw me looking at him, and he waved it, like to say, "Oh yeah," like a laugh, like he didn't care. I shouldn't care, and I'll never meet that guy again. But we had a moment there where the absurdity of him having to take a shit in the woods because, we're not allowed to be complete animals anymore and shit where we want or piss where we want, and maybe that's more to do with hygiene. But that was a funny moment, and then I'm talking to you, and then a biplane flies over, and that gives me a bit of pleasure, makes me think about planes and aviations, and all kinds of things like that. And that's how to live your life, not in a state of anything. I don't like people who are hardcore skeptics. Are skeptical types, I'm skeptical, but that's how debunkers, those twats. And I don't like people who are all out there, everything's a conspiracy and everything, this, that, and the other. But there's a happy medium in the middle. And that happy medium in the middle is what conspiracy theorists used to be before feckin' truthers and all 9/11, all that shite came along and ruined everything. And we were not considered mental cases. We were not considered clowns or fools. In fact, I can distinctly remember back in the 80s, it was considered, and it will come back. Believe me, it was considered cool when I was in the music scene, the young kids and bands. That's all we ever spoke about was conspiracy theory. That was and art and music, but that was a common subject, and we were the cool ones, and that was a cool discourse among interesting people. We were talking about the Kennedys and all that kind of thing, and many things. I mean, the Nation of Islam. I first heard about how the Nation of Islam is a very interesting cult based on flying saucers and stuff from a young black kid who was a bass player in a band in New York years ago. And we used to this is the kind of people who used to talk about this stuff. And it was only that certain truth gurus went out there and acted like they discovered all this stuff. In reality, they were probably all nerds and geeks who didn't talk about anything, didn't have any kind of cool subjects, and then found about this stuff and tried to market themselves as the unique owner of them. But the enclosure of the mind is also a reflection of the enclosure of the property. See, that's why they call it the Babylon mind. That's why I called that when I first started out and coming on this scene in 2011-12, and I did that film with ICANN, Breaking the Babylon Mind. That's what I was saying. I was saying, stop your square thinking, stop your basic thinking, stop your defending authority, but at the same time, don't become a feckinija, but learn, explore. And there was one part in that film where I spoke about the spiral, and the spiral is a way to, and this is why spirals appear all over megaliths maybe, and all over, the spiral is an enduring archetype. It goes right back to, it's a phosphene, it's one of these neurological form constants that show in our brains without any form of light, when you have this prisoner cinema effect. And the spiral represents two things. It represents going forward in time, and it represents going backwards in time. It represents, when a spiral reaches the center, that's not the end. The spiral has no end. And so I did a little section in the film speaking about the tarot and the hermit card, which is number 9. I recently found a funny outtake of that film where I was going, and on the tarot, the card is number 9, the hermit crab. And I went, and you hear me going, oh, for fuck's sake. That's really funny. But the hermit crab. But, yeah. And the hermit is the solitary figure who achieves enlightenment internally and moves in the dark. He's not sinister, and he's not... See, the hermit card does not represent loneliness. In fact, it represents anything but loneliness. It's you going on a journey with yourself. And that's why the hermit card, he's always carrying a lamp or a lantern or a flaming torch in the night as he's on his journey, because that's the light of enlightenment from within. And he needs that enlightenment to guide him at night in the dark on his journey, but also to keep that light burning, to not let that light go out, because when that light goes out, it goes into blackness and darkness, and the journey has failed. Now, the hermit card in many illustrations is also carrying a staff. That's not only a walking stick, but it's also a weapon. It's a weapon to defend off the predators in the dark. So to tell us that, so all these like fellas who sit there going om and meditating, like Russell Brand wants us all transcendental meditating. Well, that's the most dangerous shit in the world. But, some of the Indian yogis there's martial arts groups. It's sort of a martial arts mentality that you meditate, but you have to be ready to get up and kick someone's ass if you have to. But we've completely missed that in the West. I meditate for peace, all this kind of thing. No, It's the steel glove behind the velvet glove. The armored glove the weapon behind the weapon in your trousers. Not that, not that metaphor. I mean, like the knife, carry a weapon. That's what that's all about, because it's just like in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says to Arjuna on the field of battle, fight, Arjuna, fight, meaning, yes, you have enlightenment, yes, you must ponder these things, but you still have to put intention into action. You have to have action, and that's why the hermit card, he carries a staff, he carries a stick. It's a walking stick, but it's also a weapon. Just like Gandalf uses his walking stick in The Lord of the Rings as both a device for an old man to help him walk, and just like he walks, and just like when he got Grim of Worm Tongue, and also as a weapon when he has to whoop ass. And that's true enlightenment. You don't become a vegetable sitting there going, oh, spiritual socialism, I'm going to sit here all day and meditate, just like, and it's like, oh yeah, you got truths. No. You have your meditation. This is why I'm against meditation. I think it's a journey of the hermit is a far more, shall we say, worthy test of us as a person. Now, the hermit is the classic example of how to break the Babylon mind, because the hermit doesn't stand up with a megaphone and whoop ass. Whoop, yeah, no, we need that dumb. No, that stuff, making a fool of himself. Or he doesn't, because I'm Freeman in the land. I have no name. I do not consent with. I've no contract with statutory law, and the law is a complete sham, and it's not real. And I'll be giving a press conference from my holding cell in Wormwood Scrubs prison on how the law isn't real. It's a fiction. It's a fiction. You have to laugh. No, he doesn't do that either. The hermit moves in the night. The hermit is awake because everyone else is asleep at night. That's why the hermit card always takes place at night. He's the one who's awake, but he's not making a song and a dance about it. What he's doing is he's moving outside the acts of enclosure, both the ones created as revenue farms to put us in, because he's walking in the wilds, remember? And also the acts of enclosure on your cognition to force people into dogmas, into systems, and into belief packages. He's none of them. He's alone. It's not loneliness, it's solitary. It's the solitary journey. And I guess what's happened here today is exactly that. Because here I am sitting here, pre-recording a show, and I'm talking about how to, instead of becoming a crazy revolutionary who plants bombs and all this stuff, it's a more wise form of insurgency is to go below the radar. It's impossible for me because I have to get out there and work, but before that, I mean, in other ways I'm way below the radar, and get below the radar and move like the hermit in the night. You're not out for you're not looking for a fight, but you're ready for a fight if one comes to you, and you're keeping that light of enlightenment alive. So I'll see us all next week. We'll have a big update on the Dream project. Couldn't do it this week because of I'm away. And take care, and check out my website, thomassheridanarts.com. Buy a book if you want to support me. If you have no money, just share my videos or web pages. That all helps too. I know it's a bit of a pain in the ass with ads and stuff like that, but it's the world we live in. I have bills too, and feck 'em if they can't take it.